Hi, it's Alistair McIntyre at Electric Scotland. As this is a day where we commemorate the ending of the First World War, I thought it might be an appropriate day to remind everyone that basically hundreds of thousands of British and Commonwealth people died during that war to keep us all free. And it's often said that the EU was formed as a bulwark against Russia in those days. But I mean, the whole world has changed since. So the rationale for the EU is really, in my view, dead, and I have been fighting against being a member of the EU for many years now. I always thought when Scotland was fighting for independence, that one of the things they said at the time was that Nicola Sturgeon said, we want an independent Scotland, but we must be a member of the EU. It was very clear to me that that was wrong, and I think something like half the SNP members also agreed it was wrong, because after all, why should we stop being under Westminster's control and instead of being under Brussels' control? It made absolutely no sense, apart from the fact that the SNP recognised they were woefully inadequate to deal with the world on diplomatic terms and trade terms, that they knew they would have to rely on the EU to negotiate for us and on our behalf. The problem is that we'd be like 1% of the EU population, and hence our influence in the EU would be virtually zero. So we'd have to take whatever we got. So that was totally wrong. And don't forget, well, David Cameron allowed us to have a referendum in the EU. Nicola Sturgeon is on record as totally ruling that out. She said there'd be no referendum. If we're independent, we'll be in the EU, end of story. And she said that on TV, she said it in text, in news articles, she stated that all along. And I don't think a lot of people that wanted independent Scotland wanted us to be then reliant on Brussels rather than on Westminster. So, if you take that viewpoint, that's also why the SNP aren't really being let into all the negotiations, because you keep saying Scotland must have a say in that. Well, absolutely right, Scotland should have a say, but the trouble is, if you release anything to Scotland and they can see political advantage in damaging us that might promote independence, they'll do it. So from a British point of view, the SNP are traitors to this country and spies that are working for the EU. And that's all wrong, basically. And if we want an independent Scotland, we're going to have to realise that a lot of our trade is going to be with England. And therefore, this idea of being anti-British all the time just won't work. We should be independent but pro-Britain, in my view. There needs to be a whole new thinking about independence in Scotland. But Brexit, as I say, frankly, most of the news is anti-Brexit. The BBC, I've always trusted the BBC. I've listened and watched the BBC News ever since I was a kid. Over in the Middle East, where I was brought up, we always listened to the World Service. And I've always trusted the BBC. Now I've got to tell you, I no longer trust the BBC. I no longer trust them on Brexit. I think they're anti-Brexit, and it's very clear they're anti-Brexit. And also I have to say that their coverage of the US elections and Trump was also very much anti-Trump. And yet, he won. So I think the BBC are totally out of touch with what the world's going through right now. And therefore I no longer trust the BBC to give me news of these major situations going on in the world. They're biased, and they're remaining biased. As are most of the media. Not all the media, but most of the media are biased. They want us to remain locked into the EU. Now, I have to tell you, think about trade in the world. Where is the trade going? Because we're having to look to the next generation. And by the next generation, like 2050, go to the World Bank website. On there you'll see a report from PricewaterhouseCoopers, who have forecast where the major trade will be by 2050. So that's what, 33 years away. Not long. And what this forecasting is that China will be the #1 trading nation in the world, followed by India, followed by the USA, followed by Indonesia. Britain is still forecast to be in the top 10, I will say, on these figures. Now, the second thing is, economists. I would think almost all the economists have got the forecast totally wrong. They all gave us this big fear thing about how things will be much worse if we voted to leave the EU. And yet every single figure that's been coming out since the referendum shows Britain's in a much more powerful position today than it's ever been. I mean, even was it the report on the feeling of well-being of Brits. They first did an analysis of that in 2011, and apparently in 2017 we're now more happier with our country than we've ever been. That's pretty significant. And then every forecast about losing jobs, we've got the highest employment situation and the lowest unemployment situation for years. Our exports are growing, our inward investment is growing. Every economic measure you can put on Britain today is better than it was before we had the referendum to leave. Now these are facts, because these are from factual information, factual reports. But obviously they can be spun any which way you want. And unfortunately that's what you get. Like the BBC said, we've done well despite Brexit. Why have they got to put despite Brexit? Why can't they say because of Brexit we're better? But it's them, it's despite. That's why you can't trust the BBC any longer. The Financial Times continually gets it wrong. All the economic reports they put out are wrong. Like there's been the Swiss bank, who's earlier reported that if we're leaving the EU, then they're going to be taking 100,000 jobs to Europe, out of London. And yet the report they put out just the other day said they see no more than 5,000 being moved out of London into the EU. So you see, everyone's changing. I mean, Sir James Dyson, who is our top entrepreneur, largest landowner in the UK, he's come out saying he would be happy to deal under WTO terms. And he's in favour of a hard Brexit. He said, let's just get out and get on with it. So increasingly, all the information is telling us that we're actually making a good decision to come out of the EU. The problem is, our politicians on the whole are pretty stupid people. I mean, most of them are stupid. And I'm sorry to say that, but they are. If you look at their backgrounds, none of them have any background in international trade or anything. They don't understand international trade. So what we have here in Scotland, for example, is people being doom and gloom about coming out because of Brexit with no deal. I mean, what Scotland needs to be doing right now is naming and shaming people. Like, we need to list the businesses. Are you prepared for Brexit? What are you going to be doing when we come out of the EU? Where are you going to trade? How are you geared up to trade outside of the EU? Because if you think about it, 2/3 of Scottish exports go to England. I mean, there obviously are stupid people, I mean really stupid people, that argue that's a load of rubbish. But the fact of the matter is, most of our trade goes to England. And if you ask any of these people that so-called export England, none of them see that as exports, because we're one country, same currency, no trade tariffs or anything like that. So what you can sell to someone in Glasgow, you can sell at exactly the same price, the same currency, to someone in Coventry. The only difference would be maybe the transport costs might be a little higher. That's about the only difference you've got. So, whatever happens, England's going to be a very important market for us, which is why, if Scotland wants to be independent, it needs to be independent in a very friendly fashion and be fashioning really good free trade deals with the rest of the UK. We need to be positive, but instead we're so negative about the UK that why on earth would the rest of the UK be particularly interested in helping Scotland? And right now, the SNP, they've been perfectly honest, they want independence or bust. End of story. They don't care what state of Scotland is in, as long as it's independent. So it can go downhill, the unemployed can be more unemployment, we can have people that are worse off. SNP literally don't care as long as we're independent. That means they have to be treated as spies and traitors to the greater United Kingdom. Have to be. There's no other way to deal with the SNP. Because they won't talk up Britain. And that's what we need now. We need to stop being bullied. As I say, if you ever read the history of the First World War, you know, it's appalling. The hundreds of thousands of British people and people in the Commonwealth that died in that war was horrendous. And that was fighting to keep Europe free. And the same happened in the Second World War. And now we have a Third World War that's actually economic. And again, it's Germany that's ruling the roost here. EU can't do anything without Germany's say-so. End of story, because Germany is the massive economic leader in Europe. It's also the banker of Europe. So, you know, when we're fighting the EU, we're fighting Germany all over again. Where is our pride in our country? Why are we kowtowing to the Germans yet again? Where did it get us in the First and Second World Wars? You need to learn the history. That's to say I'm against individual Germans, but the German state has always been for themselves and they couldn't care less about anyone else. I mean, after the Second World War, I mean, the world wrote off half of their debt to help them reconstruct. Yeah, what has Germany done with Greece? Have we written off half of their debt to help them out? No. Germany is not interested in anyone else but themselves. They're very selfish people. So I think, and also if you look at emigration or immigration, Germany had a declining working population. And that declining working population looked like getting even worse. So this was the chance to bring in 1 million new workers. So again, this immigration benefited Germany. But because they didn't put checks and all that in place, they've actually caused a lot of the problems that we're having currently with terrorism in Europe. But again, Germany wasn't interested in Europe, they were really interested in themselves. Germany is a very selfish world, very selfish nation. And so we've got to recognise that. And as I say, the EU have now said, unless we agree a figure of whatever it is, 60 billion, 40 billion, 20 billion, 100 billion, we must agree to a sum before trade talks will go on. That's bullying. I have never given in to bullies in my life, and I certainly will not give in to them now. I say tell the EU to go take a hike. It's time we just came out. I mean, as the 3 largest economies in the world, or 4 largest economies in the world, because you've got the USA, you've got India, and you've got China, and you've actually got Japan, which is currently one of the top 4. They all deal with the EU under WTO terms. So why can't Britain deal under WTO terms? Have we no pride? Do you think we're somehow worse than these countries? I say we're every bit as good as any of these countries. So if they can deal under WTO terms quite successfully, so can Britain. End of story. You tell me why we can't, when these other countries can. Is there something wrong with Britain, that we can't deal under WTO terms? So I want you to look at that, but I also want you to look at the Commonwealth. Because after all, with India in there, the Commonwealth accounts for a third of the world's population, which is growing fast. And basically, it's something like 60% of that population are under 30 years of age. So the growth is going to be amazing. That's where we need to be, in the Commonwealth. We have the 4 key countries, they call them C4, which is Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Canada is actually currently the 10th largest trading nation in the world right now. So if we take Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Britain, us 4, C4, we could have free immigration. Free immigration. Because, I mean, we're so similar, it isn't true, just as different weather. But apart from that, we're pretty much the same. Same kind of political systems, same human rights systems. Everything's pretty much the same. And why would either of our countries want to go anywhere else? I mean, as it happens, I moved to Canada. But it's still in the Commonwealth, so I still have the Queen as head of state. But all the laws in Canada are very similar to what they are in the UK. No real difference at all. And then if you look at the top 7 economies in Africa, they're all in the Commonwealth. So the Commonwealth is a brilliant place to start with free trade. And in 2018, there's going to be the biannual heads of government meetings. So every country in the world, their heads of state will come to Britain in London to discuss Commonwealth matters. They come every 2 years, basically. And in 2018 will be the turn of London to host that event. What a marvellous event. And our royal family have been visiting Commonwealth countries every year ever since they've been heads of state. Prince Charles has been many times, and Prince William's been many times to the Commonwealth countries. So, I mean, our connection with the Commonwealth is strong, but equally well, the Commonwealth could be one of the major blocs. You talk about the G20 and the G7. So, you know, we could equally be the Commonwealth. Could equally be as important as the G7 is currently, if we really get our acts together and work together. And the Commonwealth's own research says that when 2 Commonwealth countries negotiate deals together, they're basically 20% more successful and 19% less expensive. So there are major advantages in dealing inter-Commonwealth. So you need to look at the World Bank site, you need to look at the Commonwealth website to understand what's going on here. And as I say, think also, why are we being held to ransom by the EU? We don't owe them anything. If anything, they owe us a lot more than we owe them. But when we joined the common market, which made sense. But today the EU is all about political integration. We want to have a common financial market within the EU, but we're talking about a declining part of the world trade. The EU is definitely declining in influence and trade power. I mean, in that 2050, only Germany as well as Britain will be in that top 10. And so don't forget, Germany runs the EU. They might say otherwise, but they're the big bankers of the EU. The EU can't go anywhere without Germany's backing. So it's Germany that runs the EU. And as I say, we've already come through 2 world wars. Wars didn't work, therefore the next way to overcome things is to do it economically. And Germany's trying to do it economically. But we've seen the signs were coming out. We agreed to a common market, not to political union. And then, so, you know, I mean, I would also recommend you go to Brexit Central website, because they at least are a positive aspect for things that are good for Britain, and they'll tell you the good news, whereas the Financial Times, the Guardian, the Telegraph, the Scotsman and so forth, they won't release these pieces of information, the good news, because the good news doesn't sell papers. Bad news will sell papers. The good news doesn't. And so, you know, we need to get the information ourselves from other places. I mean, certainly some newspapers are a bit more pro-Brexit than others. But again, the danger is reading just pro-Brexit and just anti-Brexit. We need to read stuff on both sides, because I'm of the favour of saying, let's just make the statement, we're not want to negotiate any longer, we're coming out completely. We'll deal with you under WTO terms, we'll pay nothing, and we'll just come out in March 2019. And we'll deal with you under WTO terms. In my way, that's very simple. We pay nothing, because why pay 60 billion to the EU when we could spend that 60 billion in the UK? It would help our NHS, it will help our education system, it will help basically our exporters. That money's far better spent in the UK than it is spent giving it to Europe, and I mean, they're not even guaranteeing us a trade deal. They just want the money, and if we happen to hack some kind of trade deal out of it, well, fine. But there's no guarantees in any of that. But they want guarantees on the money before they'll talk about anything else. That's just wrong, and it's bullying. And you don't give in to bullies. You really don't. And I say, if you're a Remainer, I'm sorry, I consider you to be a traitor to this country, and also a coward. I mean, there's so much available when we're out of the EU, all these trade deals we can do. We could be making a fortune, we could be making billions more than we do now. We'd be slashing our national debt, and we spend something like 60 billion on interest payments alone on our national debt. Everyone that runs a home knows that when you max out your credit cards, you're under a lot of problems, and you're paying a whole pile of money just to keep the credit running. That's not good business. And so we've got to fix that as far as the UK is concerned. We've got to get rid of that debt if we can. And we can get rid of the debt if we're outside of the EU. And I say, don't forget, because of these tariffs the EU impose, we actually end up paying more for food than we need to. So by coming out of the EU, we can actually, the poorest of us would be better off, because their household food bills would be cheaper. I mean, no one wants to talk about things like that. And also, if you're talking about free trade in the world, you're globalist, you're green, and all this kind of stuff, I mean, why are we penalising Africa? Because that's what the EU does. It penalises and holds Africa back. I mean, like Germany will import all the raw coffee beans without tariffs because they want them. Then they process them into the finished coffee products and make a fortune. But if Africa sells finished coffee products, they're tariffed, like heavily tariffed. So that's a disincentive to buy from finished coffee products from Africa. So, they're harming the potential for Africa, keeping poor people down. That's what Germany's doing. And the EU by default. So, we need to look at these things. So, anyway, as I say, I think that this demand that in 2 weeks' time we've got to tell them what money we're going to pay them, frankly, we should just put two fingers up and say we're not paying anything. Unless you give us a trade deal that is outstanding, then we might pay you something. Might. But only if the trade deal is to our benefit. And frankly, I can't say how any trade would be to our benefit. As I say, if the three largest economies in the world can deal with the EU under WTO terms, why can't Britain? Why can't Britain? You tell me why they can't. And don't forget, if we stay in the single market, we have even less say than we do as a full member of the EU right now. So we have to accept it. We can't argue against any of the regulations. And a lot of the regulations mean they can't do free trade deals with other countries. Who the hell wants to do that? You're coming out of the EU, you're handcuffing yourself by staying in the single market and can't do free trade deals because the laws of the ECJ say we can't do them. I mean, where are the brains of these people like Ruth Davidson and Nicola Sturgeon that say you must stay in the single market? If we come totally out, there's no reason we can't do individual immigration deals if Scotland needs more immigrants. That's not to say we can't do that after we've left, but it'll be for a particular reason and it'll be managed in a particular way that it will benefit Scotland. But no, I mean, the way the SNP put it is everything or nothing. And that's total rubbish. Nothing's ever everything or nothing. There's always compromises along the road. And that's what we can do, but we must do it outside of the EU single market and ECJ control totally. So there you go. That's my up-to-date assessment of Brexit. We need to just come out. We don't want to be paying anything to remain in, and we don't want to remain in any other single market under the ECJ laws and regulations. We want to just come straight out, save the money, put it into Britain, and let's get on with dealing with the world. So that's my view. I hope you'll agree with me. But if you don't, and you feel you've got an argument that would make sense, by all means, make a comment on that. I'm happy to listen. But as I say, I'm always willing to do some compromising, but I genuinely believe we're better right out of the EU in total and deal under WTO terms. So there you go. Thanks for listening, and hope you agree with me.